My name is Verna Alcott. I am 66 years old, and I keep a homestead at the head of Sweetgrass Valley, in the high country where the wagon road quits its easy climb and stands up on its hind legs to go over the notch, in a corner of Montana that most maps still can't be bothered to name. It isn't much to look at, my place. A low log house chinked white with lime, a deep porch looking down the whole length of the valley, a stone and log barn built into the hillside, a spring house over the coldest, sweetest water in 3 counties, a milk cow named Josephine who thinks a great deal of herself, a pair of mismatched mules, a flock of speckled hens, and up on the little rise behind the house, under 2 crooked pines, a fenced square of ground with 3 stones in it that hold the whole reason I am able to tell you anything at all. And in the west gable of my house, in the window that faces up the road toward the notch, there hangs a lamp, a big brass lamp with a clean chimney and a good wide wick. And every single evening for the last 19 years I have climbed the loft ladder at dusk and lit that lamp and set it in that window so it burns all the night through. And there is a second one, a barn lantern, on a tall peeled pole out by the road gate. And those 2 lights are the beginning and the middle and the end of everything I mean to tell you tonight, so pull your chair up close to the fire, because nothing else will make sense until you understand why an old woman burns good coal oil all night long for an empty road. My husband was Thomas Alcott, and Thomas freighted over the notch, hauling ore and mail and dry goods up from Ledford to the mine camps on the far side, and there was no steadier man on that mountain. 19 years ago, in the first week of December, a blizzard came down off the peaks the way they do up here, without much warning and with no mercy at all, a white roaring wall of it. And Thomas was coming home late over the top with an empty wagon, not a mile from this house, so close that on a clear night he could have seen his own kitchen window. But there was no clear night. There was only the white blowing sideways and the world scrubbed out to arm's length. And somewhere in that last terrible mile within shouting distance of his own hearth, Thomas lost the road. They found the wagon 2 days later, tipped in the gulch below the switchback, and on the 3rd day they found Thomas, sitting up against a boulder with his back to the wind, having sat down to rest for just a minute the way freezing men do, within half a mile of this porch. And here is the thing I could never get shut of, the thing that has driven me up that loft ladder every dusk for 19 years. If there had been a light, if there had been one lamp burning in one window at the head of the valley that night, one steady point of yellow in all that howling white, Thomas would have steered for it the way a man steers for anything that means warm and alive, and he would have come home. So the same week we buried him, I began. I put the biggest lamp I owned in the west gable window and lit it at dark and let it burn till dawn, and I have never once let it go out since. Not for storms, not for sickness, not for the years I was so poor I ate my seed potatoes, because the mountain does not care whose husband is out in it. And on any wild night there is somebody out on that road who is late or lost or hurt, and I made up my mind a long time ago that no soul was ever going to lose the road within sight of my house again for the want of one lamp. Some folks in Ledford think I am a little touched for keeping it. And maybe I am, but I have had strangers knock on this door in the dead of the night. Once a boy of 19 with both feet frozen white, who I do not believe would have seen the morning if my window had been dark. And if you have ever kept a lamp in a window for somebody who was late coming home, then you already know the whole heart of this. So when you've heard me out, tell me about it, because a story like this is only half told until somebody tells it back. Now all of that is the ground this story stands on, but the story itself is only 2 winters old, and it starts the way the biggest things so often do, with a man being cruel on a cold afternoon in front of a crowd that laughed. His name is Alden Rowe, and I will try to be fair to him, because he has since earned a little fairness, but I will not pretend he was anything 2 winters ago but a hard, cold, prospering man. He owned the toll road up to the Notch, and the freight barn, and the mercantile in Ledford, and for 3 years he had wanted my land. Not the whole homestead. He wanted my spring and the flat bench above it at the head of the road, because he meant to put a fine new stage station and toll house there, at the mouth of the pass, where every wagon over the mountain would have to stop and pay, and my house sat square in the middle of his plan like a stump in a field. Twice he offered me money, $300 the last time, and twice I told him no, because Thomas built this house with his own hands and is buried under those pines with our 2 babies that the mountain winters took before they were grown. And there is no sum a man can write on a bank draft that buys a woman off the ground her whole family is sleeping in. Alden Rowe took it the way that kind of man takes no from a woman, smiling with only the bottom of his face. "One of these winters the mountain's going to freeze you out of here for nothing, Verna," he said, folding his money back into his coat, "and then I'll buy your ashes off the county for $10. I told him the mountain and I had come to an understanding. That was a proud, foolish thing to say, because nobody has an understanding with a mountain. You have manners with it, is all. You keep your woodpile deep and your light burning and your door on the latch. You never turn a cold traveler away, and you never ever laugh at somebody the winter has been hard on, because it has not finished being hard on you." Ledford had forgot that, and the autumn this story starts, Alden Rowe forgot it out loud. There had been a hard year all over the territory, mines closing and banks failing back east, and it had put more people on the roads than anybody could remember. Whole families moving through with everything they owned in a wagon, and folks took to calling them drifters and road trash. One October afternoon, Alden Rowe stood on his mercantile step with a knot of loafing men around him, and said the thing I want you to hold on to, because this whole story swings on it like a gate on a hinge. A ragged family had come up the valley that day, out of money, asking to trade work for flour, and Rowe had run them off, and he stood on his step in his good wool coat and said, good and loud so the whole street could hear, "If these beggars can't feed themselves, they can drift on over the mountain and freeze on somebody else's doorstep, and it won't be no loss to a Christian country." And the men around him laughed. Not all of them, but enough. And I was there, across the street by my mules with a sack of cornmeal on my hip, and I heard it, and I did not say one single word, and I have been ashamed of that silence every day since. And I have come to believe that everything the mountain sent afterward was its way of handing one old woman the chance to answer proper. That ragged family Rowe ran off came up my road at dusk, in the first hard cold of that fall, and I was out on my porch, having just lit the lamp when I heard them before I saw them. The dry squall of an ungreased axle, and the blow of tired horses, and under it, thin and worn out, the crying of a small child, the kind that has gone on so long it has forgot what it wants. And any woman who has walked the floor all night with a sick little one knows that sound in her back teeth. Then they came into the ring of my pole lantern, a high old farm wagon, canvas top gray and patched, one wheel wrapped in wire, drawn by 2 horses so poor you could have hung your hat on their hips, a man and a woman on the seat, and behind them the shapes of children and an old woman. Everything they owned lashed under a wet tarp. The man pulled up at my gate and did not get down, and I understood, because a proud man run off from one town does not come boldly through the next gate. It was the woman beside him who spoke first. Her voice with the careful evenness of somebody carrying a full bucket she is determined not to spill. "Ma'am," she said, "we saw your light from the bottom of the grade. We don't mean to trouble you. We only need to know if there's a place a family could make a cold camp out of the wind for the night without giving offense, for we've been made to understand this valley don't care for travelers, and we won't stop where we're not wanted." I walked out to that gate and looked up at them, and I will tell you exactly what went through me, because it is the hinge of this whole story. It was not pity. Pity is a coin you toss down to somebody you have already decided is beneath you. What went through me was the memory of a white, roaring wall of snow, and a man sitting down against a boulder half a mile from his own door, and the plain arithmetic of a split wheel and 2 starved horses and a child crying itself hoarse, and the first hard freeze of the year settling into the ground, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. "This valley may not care for travelers," I said, "but this house does, and always has, and nobody who steered for my light is sleeping in a cold camp while I've got a stove and a spare room. Turn your team in the gate. There's hay for those horses and supper for your people, and you'll not be gone by first light in this cold, so put that out of your head right now." The woman looked down at me a long moment, and the man turned his face to her, and something passed between the two of them without a word, the way it passes between married folks who have been poor together a long time and have learned to say the important things with their eyes. Then the woman said, "Lo, we can't pay you, ma'am." "I know it," I said. "I didn't ask you." Their name was Halloran, road people, a family that had made its living for 4 generations building in stone. The man was Emmett, near 40, broad through the shoulders, with a heavy dark beard and the biggest, most careful hands I ever saw on a human being, and he did not say a great deal, being one of those men who learned young that most words are wasted. His wife was Nell, the one who had spoken at the gate, worn thin the way that year had worn a great many good women, with a level, steady face and brown hair tied back under a faded kerchief, and a way of looking at a thing full on and not flinching. There was a boy near grown named Rob, all wrists and elbows, who was unhitching those poor horses before anybody told him to, and a girl of maybe 10 named Sadie with a solemn round face who took charge of a bundle of quilts like it was the crown jewels. There was the old woman, Emmett's grandmother, that half the mountain called Gran Ada, straight-backed as a fence post under a black shawl, with eyes like 2 chips of river ice that priced my soul the moment she saw me, and did not seem displeased with the figure. And the little one who had been crying, a child of about 3 named Tomsy, hot with fever, wrapped in a shawl against Nell's chest. When I got that family into my kitchen and into the lamplight, the rest of the ledger read itself to me the way it does to anybody who has known hard times. Their flour sack, when Nell set it on my table, was folded flat and empty. That child was fevered. Those horses were done. And under the tarp I saw the tools, chisels and mallets and a mason's hammer, all of it oiled and cared for like scripture, the working tools of a family that built in stone and had run clean out of anything to build. So I did what a woman alone learns to do, or starves not doing. I built the fire up till the stove lids glowed, and fried side meat and biscuits, and opened my last 2 jars of green beans and stewed dried apples soft, and milked Josephine an hour early so there'd be warm sweet milk for that fevered child, and got Feverfew and Willow into little Tomsy a spoonful at a time, and then I stood at my stove and watched a hungry family eat, which is a thing that will rearrange a woman's insides. They ate quiet and steady, not grabbing, and Nell fed the little one broth off a spoon before she took a bite herself, and Big Emmett would not sit down at first. He stood by the door with his hat in his two hands until I told him there was no chair in my house anybody had to earn. And even then he ate standing, and afterward he carried his tin plate out to the barn, because a man of his raising does not leave strange horses on a strange place the first night without going to see to them himself. Over supper Nell gave me their names one at a time, and I gave them mine, and that was the whole of what I asked, and I want that set down plain, because it matters to everything after. I did not ask where they were bound, nor what had put them on the road in November with a split wheel and a sick baby, nor how long they meant to stay. A family at my table is not a prisoner giving testimony, but Nell told me some of it herself, with her spoon laid down, in a voice she kept flat on purpose. They had gone to the Ledford Mercantile that afternoon to buy flour and beg the loan of a jack, cash money for the goods and honest work for the loan, and Alden Rowe had come out on his step, looked at their wagon and their children, and said loud for his loafers to hear, "We don't outfit drifters in this town." And they had been made to feel so small that they drove straight up the grade rather than spend one more hour where they were counted as trash. She told it level, and when she was done she looked at me square and said, "I don't tell you that for pity, ma'am. I tell it so you know what you've taken under your roof, in case you'd rather think again on your supper." "I've thought on it," I said. "Eat your apples." And from the corner by the stove, old Gran Ada spoke for the first time all evening, one dry cackle of a laugh, and said, "She'll do, Nell. Light keepers is a breed." And after that the kitchen eased. When the children had been fed to the eyebrows and little Tomsy had gone from crying to sleeping, I took Nell down the short hall and opened the door on my spare room, my own children's room once, aired every spring for 19 years and hardly ever used, with 2 good beds and a stove of its own and a quilt on each that I had pieced in the long winters. And I said, "Your family sleeps warm tonight, and every night you're here. And there's a bolt on the inside of that door, if it eases you any." Nell read the room the way her husband reads stone, slow and whole, and put her hand flat on the door frame the way you'd touch a gravestone. And all she said was, "Thank you." But there was a whole winter of held-back weariness let go in the way she said it. Now here comes the part I have told at more firesides since than I can count, and I ask you to hear it plain as a woman reading out the terms of a deed. Before she turned in, Nell came back to the kitchen where I was banking the stove, and squared herself up and said, "Mrs. Alcott, I'll say one thing more before I sleep, so it's said and heard and you can never claim you weren't told. Amongst road people, amongst folks that build and mend their way across this country, a lit window is a debt. Not the kind you write in a book, the kind that's kept in the marrow. You set a light in a window for lost travelers, and then took strangers in off a cold road and fed them and asked them nothing. And that is wrote down now. Wrote where no snow can cover it and no year can wear it out. And it draws interest, and it will be paid. You don't understand what I'm telling you yet, and that's all right. One winter you will. I told her a light in a window wasn't a debt. It was just neighborliness, and it cost me nothing I'd miss. And Nell shook her head once, the slow way you shake it at a child who is wrong in a harmless way, and said, "It ain't neighborliness, and it ain't nothing. It's a light kept for people you'll never meet, on nights you'll never know about, for 19 years. The road knows exactly what that is, even if you don't. It's been said now. That's the whole of what I owe you tonight, ma'am. The saying." And from the dark of the hall, Gran Ada's cracked old voice came drifting back to nobody in particular, and what she said was, "The saying is the seed. The rest comes up in its season." I went to bed that night in a house that had people breathing in it for the first time in more years than I cared to count, And along toward the small hours I heard, or half heard, or dreamed I heard, a sound out at the spring house, a soft patient tapping, muffled, like a woodpecker working somewhere in the fog, tap, 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 unhurried, and once, faint, the ring of iron on stone. And I thought, let the man be. A proud man's dignity does its business at its own hours. And I went back to sleep. In the morning I was up before light the way 66 years of cows and cold will fix a woman, and I went out to the spring house with my milk pail and stopped dead in the gray dawn with my hand still on the latch. My spring house wall, the old dry-laid stone wall that had been leaning and shedding rock and letting the cold in for 6 years, ever since the frost heaved its footing, stood straight and true and new. Emmett Halloran was sitting on an upturned bucket beside it in the raw cold with his tools wrapped and his big hands hanging loose between his knees, and he watched me come and take it in. He had torn the whole leaning face down in the night and reset the footing below the frost and laid the wall back up dry. Without a lick of mortar, every stone canted so clever that it carried its own weight into the ground. All of it alone, in the dark, by feel and one lantern. Better than any mason for 100 miles could have done in a week of daylight. That was the tapping I had heard, a mason's hammer wrapped in a rag so as not to wake the house that fed him. I put my hand on that new old wall, and I had to work my jaw a moment before it would say anything, and I said, that wall's been failing 6 years. I've priced a mason to fix it and never had the money. And Emmett Halloran stood up off his bucket and laid one of those great careful hands flat on the cold stone and spent a few of his hoarded words on me, which I would come to learn he did not do for just anybody. And what he said low and plain was, good stone. It'll hold. And then he took up his tools and went to see about the split wheel, and I stood in my spring house doorway with my empty milk pail, looking at that wall standing straight for the first time in 6 years, and whatever it was that had been sitting on my chest for 19 years, right about then it shifted its weight. They meant to be gone in a day or two, but Tomsy's fever hung on, and then a 3-day snow shut the grade over the notch. And I said only a fool runs a sick child over a snowed pass to prove a point. Nell said, then we'll work our keep or we'll go. And she meant it, so they worked it. And those next weeks were the fullest that Homestead had been since my own children were alive. Emmett mended the split wheel and then could not seem to stop, rebuilding my barn's failing foundation, laying a proper stone stoop at my door, pointing up the chimney that had smoked for a decade, and every stone thing that had been losing its fight with the mountain, he quietly won it back. The boy Rob ranked me 2 winters of stovewood, and Nell took over my kitchen so complete that by the 2nd week I couldn't have found my own salt, and I did not care one bit, because I had forgot what a house smells like with bread rising in it, and it turns out you can dust grief out of a house, but you cannot scrub it out, and the only thing that truly moves it is somebody baking. And it was Gran Ada, from my rocker by the fire, who told me the thing I have turned over every dusk since. Used to be lights all up these mountains, she said, homestead folk that kept a lamp where the road could see it and a warm door under it. Road people had a name for such a place, a kept light. Wasn't charity and wasn't trade, just the old manners of high country, where the winter is the same enemy to everybody, and a body alone is a dead body. Ain't but a few kept lights left now, she said, and she looked at my west window, and then at me, and didn't need to say the rest. Little Tomsy mended in the warm, the fever breaking on the 5th night, the child waking up hungry and cross and alive. And all that while Emmett Halloran was studying my mountain, standing up on that bench Alden Rowe wanted so bad, looking at the run of the old snowslides on the peak above, and the way the wind laid the drifts. And near the end he stood a long while, whispering low to Nell, and she came and gave it to me straight. "Emmett says that slope above your barn is hung wrong," she said. "The timber got cut off the shoulder of that peak years back, and now there's nothing to hold the snow, and some heavy winter it's going to come down as a slide, right down that draw, and take your barn and your stock with it. He says move your stock to the lee of the rock ledge before the deep snow, and the head of your valley wants a stone tower for that lamp of yours, set high on the bench, so the light throws twice as far and can't be blown dark, and he'd build it if there was ever time and stone." I told her the barn had stood 30 years where it was, and Nell said, "Emmett says nothing stands against the mountain. Things only stand until," and I knew, the way you know a true thing you'd rather not, that he was right. When the grade opened, they loaded to go, for a family that builds must go where the building is, and I did the one piece of commerce of that whole visit, which was to load their wagon before they could stop me, with a side of meat and a sack of my flour and seed and a crock of apple butter I'd been saving 4 years, and 2 good wool quilts off the spare beds, and when Nell squared up to argue, I got there first. "It's freight," I said, "not charity. You're carrying word up the mountain for me. Tell the road there's a kept light at the head of Sweetgrass, same as there always was, and it'll always be burning." And Nell looked at me a long moment with those level eyes, and something in her face gave way about 1/4 of an inch, which on Nell Halloran was a whole speech, and she said, "We'll tell the road, Mrs. Alcott, believe that we will." And Emmett took my hand in his great one and said, "Lo, we'll come back and build you that tower. Good stone lasts." And then they went up over the notch in the thin, bright cold, the wagon small against the snow, and little Tomsy waving a fat hand from the tailboard till the road took them out of sight. I climbed the loft ladder that evening feeling every one of my years, and lit the lamp for an empty road, and I will not pretend the house didn't feel like a tomb again after they'd gone. But here is what I want you to understand, the thing that took me 19 years to learn. So, if it does you any good, carry it out of here and give it to somebody else. Word travels the roads faster than the mail ever learned to. That winter and all the next summer my light kept catching people the way it always had. But now they came knowing my name. And things took to appearing at my gate of a morning. Cut stovewood ranked neat, a dressed deer hung in my spring house, a little stone carving of a bird left on my new stoop that fit my palm like it had been measured for it. I quit eating my supper standing over the stove and took to setting my table proper again, 2 plates as often as not, because you never knew. And down in Ledford, Alden Rowe heard about it, and buying nails in his mercantile, that January I heard one of his loafers say, loud enough for me, that the old woman at the head of the valley was running a poorhouse for road trash now. And Rowe looked up from his ledger and smiled that bottom of the face smile and said, "Mind your deed, Verna, because come spring my company drives the new toll road right up that bench, and once the stage stops at my station, that drowdy light of yours won't be worth the oil you burn in it." I bought my nails and drove home, and climbed the ladder and lit the lamp. And then came the winter this whole story is named for, and I will tell the hard part straight and quick, because I lived it slow, and once through was a great plenty. It set in to snow the 2nd week of January, and did not rightly stop for 3 weeks. Storm after storm off the peaks, 4 feet, then 6, then depths nobody had a memory of, the roads gone, the grade over the notch shut solid, every homestead an island. And I did what 19 winters had taught me. I moved my stock out of the barn and into the lean-to I'd built against the rock ledge, the way Emmett Halloran had told me to, And I want you to hold on to that, because it is the mercy inside the disaster. I had my wood in deep and my cellar full, and I climbed my loft ladder every dusk and lit my lamp for a road no living thing could travel, because a habit kept 19 years does not ask the weather's leave. And then, in the black heart of the worst night of the worst storm, the mountain did the thing Emmett had seen coming. I was in my bed and heard it start. A low, grinding groan up on the peak that climbed into a roar bigger than any freight train, and the whole house shook on its sills, and I got to my window in time to see, by the light of my own lamp thrown out on the snow, the white side of the mountain come down. The snowslide came down the draw exactly where Emmett said it would, a river of snow and shattered timber and rock, and it took my barn, my empty barn, and ground it to kindling, and buried the ground it had stood on 20 feet under, and it did not stop there. It ran on across my yard and took the spring house and half the wood pile and stove one whole corner of the house off its foundation. So the west wall cracked and canted and the loft floor dropped, and my lamp in the west window went out. I was not hurt beyond bruises and a wrenched knee, but I was shut in a broken cold house in a buried valley, with my wall stove in and the wind coming through, and my lamp dark for the first night in 19 years. And I could not climb the dropped loft to relight it, and I will be honest with you, because you have earned it. I sat down in the dark on my cold hearth that night with a dead match in my fingers, and I thought that this at last was the winter Alden Rowe had promised me, the one that froze me out for nothing. And I said out loud, to the empty broken dark, to Thomas under his pine, what good is a kept light now? And that is exactly when I heard it, away down the buried valley, faint and steady, and coming on through the snow, not the wind. Voices, and under the voices the crunch and creak of many people breaking a trail through 6 feet of snow, and the jingle of harness. And then, when I hobbled to my cracked window and scrubbed the frost off the glass, I saw the light. One light, away down at the mouth of the valley where the Ledford Road came in. Then 2 behind it. Then a whole string of them, lantern after lantern, bobbing up the buried road in the black night. A line of fire coming through the snow toward my dark house, and I counted them the way a girl counts the first stars, and I lost the count and started over twice, and the number I got, both times, was more than 40. More than 40 lanterns, breaking trail up a snowed valley in the dead of the worst night in memory, coming to me. The first ones to my gate were road people I did not even know, and behind them came others, and among them, God be thanked, breaking trail with a lantern held high, came Emmett Halloran and Nell and Rob near a man now, and behind them Gran Ada, wrapped in every quilt they owned and riding a sledge like a queen. And Nell came up my broken steps and took my 2 cold hands in hers and said, "Told you it was wrote down. Mrs. Alcott," I said, "what is all this?" And my voice did not work well, and Nell said, "This is Halloran's and Rudd's and every road family that's touched this mountain in 20 years, and half of Ledford besides that's finally found its shame. Word went out 3 days ago that the slide took the kept light at the head of Sweetgrass, and road people started for here the same evening, digging as they came. Some of us broke trail 2 valleys to stand in your yard tonight. Now let's get you warm, for this ain't a visit. What happened over the next days I could talk about for a week, so I'll give it to you all at once. By first light, my broken yard was a work yard. Emmett and a dozen men jacked my house back onto its foundation and chinked the stove wall tight before the next storm and had me warm by dark. The women dug out my cellar and doctored my knee, and the men dug my woodpile out of the slide and ranked me more. And up on the bench Alden Rowe wanted, Emmett and his brothers and cousins spent every hour they weren't saving my house doing the thing he'd promised. They quarried stone out of the slide's own leavings, the rock the mountain itself had brought down, and they raised me a tower, a round stone tower, 12 feet high, thick-walled and true, set deep below the frost, with a glassed room at the top for the lamp and a stair inside, built to stand 100 years of anything the peak could throw, set so high on the bench that the light could be seen from the far side of the notch itself. And on the third evening they called everyone up to the new tower, and Emmett climbed the little stair and set my old brass lamp, dug hole out of my broken loft, into the glassed room at the top, and lit it, and the light sprang out over the whole white valley, twice as far and twice as bright as it had ever thrown from my window, and every soul in that yard took off their hats and cut into the stone lintel over the tower door. In Emmett's own careful hand were my name, Verna Alcott, and under it, smaller, 3 words. The road remembers. Emmett took my hand in front of all of them, and the whole yard went church quiet, and he spent his hoarded voice loud enough for everyone to hear, and what he said was, "Good stone. It'll hold." And I stood in the snow in front of more than 100 people and cried like a girl, and not one soul laughed. Alden Rowe had come up the dugout road on the second day, on foot, having left his fine buggy behind in the drifts, and on that third evening, after the lamp sprang out over the valley, he came through the crowd to me with his hat in his 2 hands and said it plain, where they could all hear. "I called these people road trash off my doorstep," he said, "and I laughed doing it, and I have watched them dig you out of a buried valley and raise you a stone tower on the ground I coveted, better than my money could ever have built. For the price of a supper you gave a family 2 winters back. I was wrong, Verna, about them and about you, and I've come to say it where they can hear me." And then he asked, because the slide had wrecked his own toll road worse than mine, whether the valley might let his stage stop and water at my spring while he rebuilt, and I said that wasn't only mine to answer anymore. He'd best ask them. And Nell named the price without raising her voice. "Take down that rule of yours against travelers," she said. "Let road folk trade in your town and camp at your edge and buy their flour like Christians." And the next month Alden Rowe stood up in the Ledford Hall and did exactly that, and paid road masons a fair wage to rebuild his toll road. So the same hands his town had run off at dusk built the road its trade rolls on today, and I am told he ate in the road camp with the rest and said thank you. That was a winter and a half ago. My barn's built back, higher and to the lee of the ledge where the slide can't reach it. The tower stands at the head of my road, the lamp in it burns every night, and in one winter it has already brought 4 more lost souls up out of the storm to warm hands at my fire, 4 who would not have seen the morning. The Hallorans winter over in my valley now, in a snug stone house Emmett built 2 fields down. And little Tomsy, not so little anymore, calls me Gran Verna, and I have quit correcting it. And last fall Nell had a new baby, a girl, and they named her Ada Verna. And nobody asked my leave, and I never got one whole word said the entire day I heard of it. And the lamp. The road people and the freighters and the stage drivers all have a name for my light now. They call it the sweetgrass light, and when the weather turns to kill, every soul on that road knows there is one head of one valley, where the wall will hold, and the door is on the latch, and there is always, always a lamp. So here is the whole of what an old woman knows, learned late and told from a porch at dusk to you, whoever you are out there in the dark listening. A lamp in a window and a seat at a table are the 2 cheapest things a body can set out, and the only two the winter has never once been able to blow dark for good. You don't keep a light to be repaid. You keep it because somewhere out in the cold there is a man losing the road within sight of home, and you have a lamp and a match and no good reason on this earth not to burn them. But nothing set out in kindness at a kept light is ever truly lost. The road carries it, and the road forgets nothing it carries. And some buried winter, when you are sitting in the wreck of everything with a dead match in your fingers, the mountain that took it all will bring it back to you up the dark. 40 lanterns strong and more, breaking trail through the snow to your door, with your name cut in the stone and the road remembers underneath. It's dusk now, and my knee tells me weather is coming, so I had best climb up and light the lamp. But before I go, if you keep a light for somebody yourself, in a window or in your heart, don't ever let it go dark, and come back and sit by this fire again and tell me about it. For I'll be here, and the lamp will be lit, and away up the grade in the gathering blue a voice is already hailing the tower, lights burning, and it always will be.